Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our webinar series for 2021 and the second webinar of our series this year. We have a wonderful evening planned for you. I'm just going to go ahead and light a smudge. Sam, can you tell me, are people seeing the right screen? Because it didn't ask me which one. Okay, thanks. Well, bonjour, dinue maginiduk, dindisi indigenicas, makinak waju indunjiba, migizi indudame. And what I just said to you in Ojibwe was, greetings, my relatives. My name is Blue Jay, and I am Turtle Mountain Ojibwe, and I am Eagle Clan. My English name is Christine McCleave, so I go by Christine Dindisi McCleave, and I am the CEO for the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition. I am really glad to see you all here this evening. This is the first time we're trying an evening webinar, so let us know if this time is more convenient for you, if you want us to do more evening programs. And I guess if you're not here, you can't tell us that this didn't work for you. So I'm going to introduce Sam Torres, our Director of Research and Programs. Sam, do you want to go ahead and say hi?
Laso kamati. Nilse tonalte no yolikni nanotoka Samuel Torres Mexica Nahua na Nehuali Los Angeles, California, Iwan El Paso, Texas, Iwan Zacatecas, Mexico. And what I said to you in Nahuatl, which is my traditional language, the language of the Mexica Nahua peoples of Central Mexico, particularly my family in Zacatecas, Mexico. Was greetings, relatives. My name is Sam Torres. I am Mexica Nahua, originally born on the unceded territories, the lands of the Quiche Nation, the Tongva, the Gabrielino peoples, now known as Los Angeles. My grandparents were born in the borderlands of the so-called borderlands in El Paso, Texas, where they arrived, where they were born when my great-grandparents emigrated from the Central Valley of Mexico for the pursuit of being in a land free to practice their language and traditions and culture. I'm the Director of Research and Programs for NABS, and we're so happy to be able to be with you today and to have Nancy with us. So Laso Kamati, and with that, we'll have Christine do a little bit of introduction for Nancy.
Yes, thank you, Sam. So Sam is going to be handling our Q&A throughout Nancy's presentation. If you have questions or things that you'd like Nancy to speak more about, please go ahead and enter those in the chat. Everybody has been entered into this webinar in listen-only mode. So you will have this, kind of navigation panel. I think it shows up on the right side of your screen, but you can move it around wherever you want it. And there's a couple of things over there. There's one is a poll area. Another is where you can chat or ask questions. We would prefer you to use the questions rather than the chat. I suppose you can, but if you use questions, then we'll be able to keep track of, what we want to ask Nancy at the end of her presentation. Sam will facilitate the Q&A. And I am going to launch a couple of polls for you. We always want to know who's joining us. And if you are a boarding school survivor or a boarding school descendant, you can click both if you are both or neither. We always love it when our boarding school survivors are with us, and we honor your presence and we're grateful for your presence. And we love our boarding school descendants as well. I am a descendant of a boarding school survivor. My grandfather went to Marty Catholic Indian School, and then later he went to Haskell before it was a junior college. And then my great-grandfather went to Carlisle Indian School, and I know firsthand the impacts of having boarding school experience in family and how that can be passed down over generations. So It looks like most of you have voted and people are still joining. So if you're joining and you see this poll, greetings, welcome. We're just trying to see who's on the webinar with us. So I'm going to go ahead and close this poll out. It looks like we've got 10% of the people here are boarding school survivors, 23% are descendants. Oh, that number just flipped. 11% survivors, 22% descendants, and 67% neither. So we are glad that you are here as well as allies and supporters. So miigwech for being here. I'm going to close that poll and I'm going to send you another one. Tell us what sector you're joining from. And we are limited in our poll options here where we can only choose 5 categories. So, you know, pick the category that matches the best. And if it's other, go ahead and drop it in the chat and tell us what sector you're joining from, what type of work you're doing, or if this is personal. If, you know, if this is not related to your work, but it's just personal for you, that's great too. We welcome you all for being here. Looks like about 79%, 85% have filled it out. 90%, great, thank you so much. Oh, sad to see we don't have anyone from Tribal Services or Urban Indian Services, but we've got, oh wait, somebody finally did. Thank you, welcome, glad you're here. And about 20% of people are social work, child welfare, counseling. 28% are education, academia, or higher ed. Nobody from library, archival, and information sciences. Kind of makes sense. That's not the focus of this particular webinar. And 50% others. So yeah, okay, great, wonderful. Thank you for participating in those polls. We do like to know who's with us. And if you were here for our first webinar at the beginning of the series last month, we're grateful that you have returned for part 2. So just because this is being recorded and there may potentially be people who've never, you know, attended one of our webinars before, I just want to say that the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition is a 501c3 nonprofit, and we're headquartered in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where, you know, recent events, all eyes were on us, and we're really grateful for the way things turned out with the verdict yesterday, and breathing a sigh of relief as we also know there's so much more work to be done, and standing in solidarity with our brothers and sisters in the Black Lives Matter movement. Here at the Boarding School Healing Coalition, our mission is also around social justice and racial equity. Our mission is to lead in the pursuit of understanding and addressing the ongoing trauma that was created by the U.S. Indian boarding school policy. And today we have with us Nancy Bordeaux, and we're very excited to hear from her. She is going to be talking to us. She's titled her presentation, Beyond Historical Trauma, Indigenous Traditions Lead the Pathway to Resilience and Healing. Nancy is Sichangu Lakota, and she coached me on how to say Sichangu, but I don't think I'm doing it justice. I think I did better when I was practicing. And so she was born and raised in Rosebud, South Dakota. Nancy has worked in the Minneapolis and St. Paul, Minnesota area for 20 years in Indian child welfare, and as a tribal liaison, and as a program director for domestic violence and sexual abuse. Currently, Nancy works in partnership with the nonprofits in the Twin Cities metro area as a consultant in historical and intergenerational trauma, education, intervention, recovery, and healing for nonprofits and state programs and community members. Nancy's approach to her work is through her Lakota traditions and knowledge, and Nancy's traditional practices inform her current work today through the transference of information, knowledge, and concepts to enhance her work. Welcome, Nancy. I'm so glad you're here with us today. I'm going to invite you to I'm going to ask Sam to make you the presenter so that you can go ahead and share your screen. So we'll give Nancy a minute to do that. And really, really grateful that you're willing to be here with us this evening and to share. Oh, it looks like you might still be on mute.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay.
we can hear you.
Well, good evening, everybody. Tachankuluta we mie na da tukile wopila tanka chichi chapi. Dayawa chiankapi. Le da tukile takwa historical trauma, beyond historical trauma, hena iwoglakinte. Na dakyuha hena hena etanwas ni ukichu ngoki piki hena ijia cha hohe wopila chichi chapi. Ha. Good evening, everybody. My name is Nancy Bordeaux. My Lakota name is Tachankalutawi, which means her red road woman. Tonight, I am going to talk about beyond historical trauma, because that's where we are at today. And this is a really, really important piece of work in our recovery and whatever Indigenous community we live in or we work in, for ourselves and for our families. And so I thank all of you from the bottom of my heart for being here this evening. And I can't wait to share with you some of the information that I have been working with. Thank you. So, okay, I am looking at sharing my screen.
Yep, we can see your screen right now, and it says connected to GoToWebinar.
Okay, I am looking for. You can see my screen, but how do I pull it up now?
You're going to want to go down to your PowerPoint.
Oh, just open it.
Yep, just open it and we'll be able to see it. So if you go into the slide, like if you open your PowerPoint and click begin slideshow or whatever you want to show us. Yep. Yep. So we can.
Okay. So how do I not get rid of, but hide this on the side so that it's not getting in the view of my handout here?
We don't see that taskbar. Only you can see that. Yep.
Let me see if I can minimize this screen here. And then bring it up. Okay, so you could see this, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to pull it over to the side a lot more and pull it out this way. So I would like to, before I get started with the PowerPoint, I would like to talk about resilience and healing. And resilience and healing is when we resonate with Ujimaka, Grandmother Earth. And I think in our healing ways with whatever respective tribe that we're from, this is really important to bring our awareness to building a relationship with Grandmother Earth and everything, all life within it, within her realm, and also the water. Very important for us. It's also important for us to realize our history and why we are where we are at today because of it. And so I just like to start with a really short synopsis of, the historical trauma piece. That in 1492, there was 12.5 to 18.5 million original inhabitants in the North American continent. In 1492 was a European invasion, and the doctrine of discovery happened in 1493. Genocides, massacres, massive epidemics, bio-warfare of infected blankets, colonization, manifest destiny, federal Indian policies, all of this affected us, from wars to genocide to massacres to colonization, which was, the federal Indian policies, and the assimilation policy of which it was into assimilation into white society became the new federal policy. boarding schools were cultural genocide, open hunting season on men, women, elders, children, and babies. And we have a story about this that happened, you know, within our Lakota tribes back on our reservations, the open hunting season. Near extermination at the turn of the last century, 5% of only 5% of the indigenous people survived of the 12.5 to 18.5 million. So this is really important to know, because we need to know that for many years we've experienced genocide, war, and oppression, and that we're lucky to be here today. We're lucky to have survived that for our generations to continue, because there are some tribes that didn't survive. There are some tribes, their DNA didn't continue. And because of what happened here, our way of life was completely taken away. It was completely forbidden for us to practice, you know, our traditions, you know, and our ceremonies, you know, at one time. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is because when that happened, a soul wound happened to us, because we couldn't practice our way of life, because we were not allowed to mourn for the millions of people that died throughout the 5 centuries. We became so affected that we started to experience what we call a high mortality rate. And that happened because of the spiritual, emotional, physical trauma and the oppression that we experienced, the genocide, the ethnocide, and the ecocide. And on top of that, you know, we've experienced taking on the trauma of our ancestors. So that's, you know, from the perspective of what historical trauma is. And then comes along boarding school. And when boarding school happened in the 1800s, that was a forcible removal and kidnapping of indigenous children and taken to boarding schools, never to return to their families as a family until they aged out of boarding school. And when they returned home, they didn't know how to be parents. They didn't know, you know, it was hard for them to integrate back into their family life because they lost their culture and couldn't practice their culture. I shouldn't say lost, but they were disconnected from their culture and their language. And what they learned in boarding schools and what they experienced, you know, that became a learned behavior with them, and started, you know, a lot of the impacts of intergenerational trauma in our community today. So if we take a look at the right side, left side of this graphic here, I have what we call in our Lakota stories, this is a star, 2 inverted cones. And it's because what's up above is down below. And when we open our hearts and our spirituality, what's down below is up above. So more or less, we always pray for what's up above to come down below. However, when we experience historical trauma for many, many generations, we lived in trauma. We lived in sadness and grief. We lived in anger because of the oppression. We lived in apathy and guilt and shame because we survived. And it is also about not being in balance with who we truly were, not being in balance because we lost that connection with our traditional practices. And when we were able to practice our traditional ways, it was Mitakuya Oyasi, all my relations. We know that we are all related, you know, all life on earth and all life or all existence beyond, you know, this physical realm. And that we exist, that we thrived and we prospered in our own economy, in our own ecosystem, in our own way of life, our traditions and our culture, through prayer, through our spiritual practices. And that didn't mean that we were on our knees 24/7 praying. It was because as spirits, we were human spirits, we were allowed to practice, not allowed, but we, you know, were so fortunate to be able to have a life of spiritual practices that connected us with the natural world. And anytime that we were out there in the natural world, it brought us alive. It created an awareness that brought us to Ichozani, health and well-being. So those were our spiritual practices: gathering food, hunting, setting up camp. We were so connected with the earth that we experienced a resonance with Unjimaka. We resonated with her. So the earth, water, air, and fire were all of our healing. Purification. Every day we went to Purification Lodge. Today we can't go into Purification Lodge every day, but we can purify with our medicinal plants. So that's purification for us, and we're so fortunate to have that today. Movement in any activity that was good for us and brought health to our families and to our community. Running, walking, anything that, you know, even if you just got up and used your body, exercise, got up and cooked or cleaned the house, you know, that's healing, because we're doing something positive, we're doing something healthy that's non-toxic. So on the left side here, we have a graph, and on the graph at the top, you see the positive values of life. On the bottom, we see the negative values of life, because we were held in oppression and suppression of our tribal identities for centuries. We were not allowed to experience the top part of this, the positive spiritual values that were naturally a part of our life. And so when that happened, you know, it truly did create a soul wound. And we experienced the shame and the guilt, the apathy, the grief, fear, desire, anger, and pride, all of this for generations. We've experienced this. And this negativity became a part of us. And with this, from all of this negativity was, you know, all the emotional feelings, the thoughts that affected our very physical being. It affected our spirituality, which was little to none for the most part until we came into our awakening. We've experienced depression that was caused by all of this emotions and these values, these negative values on the side here. And because we've experienced that, then it took us to a place that we don't want to be here today. For generations, we lived in oppression. We lived in poverty. It felt like we didn't have anything, but it was actually our minds that were taken, our minds that were affected. And because we were so oppressed, so programmed, we didn't realize that we lived on our own lands, that we had our own waterways, that we had, you know, our traditional ceremonies and stuff that were preserved by us, by our spiritual leaders and our medicine men throughout, you know, the generations. And it started to come back. And so when it started to come back and we were able to go and practice, you know, our ceremonies and relearn our traditions and our language, how to introduce ourselves in our language, then what started happening was below here, from 175 to 20, all of these are natural emotions and things that we experience as human beings. But in our oppression and suppression as Indigenous people, we were not allowed to heal because of the oppression. So when we were not allowed to heal, it broke the cord of resilience for us. And that cord of resilience was the very thing that makes us a human being. But then, however, when we started to practice in our traditional ceremonies and relearn our traditional way of life, then all of a sudden we started to experience a freedom of spirit. And we were able to learn courage, the neutrality, the willingness, the acceptance, and be able to reason We were able to love ourselves. We learned how to love ourselves and to love others, to have that compassion. We learned that being joyful was a state of being that was our right as human beings. Nobody gave it to us. It belonged to us. So we reclaimed that for ourselves. We start to learn how to live in peace within ourselves and within our own tiwahe, our own family, within our own homes. And we recaptured spirituality, and it belonged to us. And we reintegrated into all of these healing ways of life. For each tribe, it's different. All the practices are different, but we share Unchimaka, Grandmother Earth, we share Grandfather Sky, and we share the air that we breathe. And so what that really means here, when you take a look at the bottom and the top, is that we learned resilience. When we didn't know resilience, we lived for years in depression. When we learned resilience, depression, it happens naturally for some reason or another, but we know what to do now. We have an awareness and we can never go back to just being stuck on the bottom with the soul wound. We start healing our soul wound. And how we know that this affects us as human beings is because all of these emotions or these values and emotions on the side, they're integrated, is because there's a what they call a heart math institute that did this study of people, and they filmed this study of people who where they showed them something really horrific or something that triggered them, and it showed their heartbeat and the racing of their heartbeat and the cortisol level in their body. But when they showed them these pictures above, something that correlated to these values and these emotions, their heart rate calmed down, and you could literally see, their faces. They were happy. And so when we stand outside on Unchimaka, then we're healing from her. When we go and we sit in our ceremonies or we sundance, we're healing from her. We can even go outside in our own yard and sit down, take off our shoes and sit down and just make that connection. And especially if you have a chronic disease like I do, an autoimmune disease, what happens is when you go outside and you sit down out there, she heals you. The inflammation in your body goes down. So what if you do this every day? It's healing for you so that you're able to walk straighter, walk faster, lift your legs up better, and so many more things. You're able to think better and feel better. It opens up your heart ways. So I just wanted to make that connection for us about what happened during, the historical trauma, and how we can come from historical trauma to resilience. And we have been doing it. Many Indigenous people have been doing this. What we need to do now is to go out and teach, the Indigenous nations about healing for ourselves and for our families in this generation right now, and with the children right now and going forward. Doesn't have to happen. People say, oh, it's not going to happen for generations. And if we're saying this, we're discounting ourselves, because it only takes 1% to heal the community. And I'm aware of that 1%. So the history of trauma is a trajectory of the pathologies that have been passed down for generations due to genocide and oppression and suppression. So it's time to create a new narrative and a new story for ourselves, which many of us have. We created a beautiful story, and we're creating beautiful memories now. The knowledge and awareness of historical trauma is regenerating the health and well-being for Native Americans. Cultural lifeways contribute to positive social structure and the resurgence of ceremonial practices, spirituality, and reconnection to their homeland and Grandmother Earth. There are the traditional healing services needed to restore Native Americans to the family system. Healing is occurring through ancient lifeways and practices that awaken the DNA of Native American people. Traditional values are creating change and transformation for individuals, families, and communities today, and that means each and every one of us here tonight. I am going to move on to my PowerPoint now. In this PowerPoint, I kind of like work with historical trauma, the trauma piece, and I took a training, and it really hit me. It hit my heart, and it opened it up because I realized that's where our healing is at. There's something called complex trauma that we've experienced for generations because of oppression, of colonialism, and because of the assimilation policies. When the children, when we were first put on the reservations, first of all, we were held captive there, and we could not leave the reservations. Thousands and thousands of Native American people died on the reservations. They starved and they froze. Children and babies starved and they're froze. And so there's a whole different piece of historical trauma, and many different people are working in this, and it's really beautiful because many of the people that are working with the historical timeline of historical trauma are really well versed. They're well versed from the time 1492 happened, when Christopher Columbus landed in South America, and from the time that happened and Manifest Destiny occurred, and then moving forward into colonialism and into federal Indian policies, and out of that was assimilation policies, and that in itself tells a story. Each of those policies, we can tell a story about that policy and how it affected us as Indigenous people. But for this particular one here, this is about our recovery from historical trauma, our recovery of our self-identity as Indigenous people, our recovery of our health and well-being, our recovery of being a free spirit, being able to travel into those dimensions that we had originally were able to do this before colonialism, before the European invasion. And I say this because we're a people that we have our ceremonies. And in these ceremonies, there are things that happen in these ceremonies, even today, that put us in a special place among the human population, because we practice this way and we're still strong in this way today. And when you have you're Indigenous and you have Woi Humble, you have a vision. You were given a vision. You have the ability to see and hear beyond what is normal. You have the ability to know what this person needs when they come before you, because you're gifted that way. And this work that we're doing today, we're meant to do. It's a work that comes from the spirit world. And when we're doing this work and we're singing our songs, the spirits are here and they're so happy and they're able to help us in whatever way that they can. That when we just sit quiet and listen to our hearts, then we know what it is that we have to do, because they're constantly informing us. We have a spiritual body, and this is a spiritual body that is being informed by the cosmos, the spiritual world. Any new information that we get, we never had before. We didn't get it from the books. Nobody told us. It is because we're told to do this and because we're receiving that guidance. And this is the way that life used to be before the European invasion. This is the way it was when we walked on that healing path. And we didn't even call it a healing path back then, but unfortunately today, we have to heal from what happened to us. For us back then, it was just a way of life. It was a way of life to go outside and take a 2-mile hike and put down tobacco and ask in prayer for help. And maybe they didn't do that back then. Maybe they went out and they smoked their pipe, or they just went out and had a conversation with the Creator and asked for this help, and went back and they had, they received, that help that they needed. So I think, beyond just the work of learning about, historical trauma and what it is and stuff, we have to discover who we are as human beings, as Indigenous people, and to know what our role is in this society of Indigenous people, and to be able to start becoming a knowledge seeker, start becoming, a learner, a knowledge seeker of your own culture, because that's where, it takes every one of us. And I say this because I've had this experience, and I really don't, I'm not one to go out and talk about, oh, I go to this ceremony or to that ceremony, but I just want to say that I do go to my ceremonies, and every summer is a ceremony for, it's probably like a ceremony for all Indigenous tribes, and we go back for maybe 2 weeks at a time for our ceremonies to complete them and to participate in them. But those are when we experience, in that healing, in that spiritual circle, we experience a way of life that we don't find in this urban area. We experience a way of life that brings us to our knees and brings us to tears, because it's so beautiful. Because we know that no matter how tired we are, if we're dancing, we wangwachi, sun dancing, and we're so tired that we see our grandmother coming in the circle and dancing beside us really hard, and it picks us up, and we dance, and I can dance there for 4 days, and I can dance like that. And I say that because this is really significant. I have diabetes, and I take insulin shots every day, and if I miss in that day 1 shot, then I can't motivate. All I could do is lay down, because I hurt all over. And when I am out there, I'm getting emotional, because when I'm out there and I'm dancing, it's the only time in decades that I can dance as if I were young again. I used to be a runner when I was young. Today I'm just a walker. I'm an old walker. But I can dance, and I can feel a joy in my heart, and I can hear the messages that are being given to me, and I know what it is that I'm supposed to do for the rest of the year. And so that's why when I go back and I dance, that's the only time that I can dance without medication. And when I'm done with those days and with the purification and stuff, I can go like days without medication. One time I even went 1 year without medication. But I have a lifestyle that's not really, let's just say I'm not that self-disciplined. And so I had to get back on the medication, but each year I go back. I think that's why I'm still alive today, because of the ceremonies, because of going back to our ceremonies throughout the year, going back for, ceremonies of Purification Lodge, all of that. Those are all healing for us. And it not only heals our bodies, it heals our minds. And so we need to always keep, in the forefront up here, right here, that this area right here between our ears is what we need to take back. It's like a piece of real estate that we need to reclaim. That if we don't do this, then we're, at the whim of things outside of us, and we're not picking the responses, but we're constantly reacting. So we don't want to be constantly reacting and wearing our emotions on the cuff of our sleeve. We want to carry our emotions right here. We want to know what they are, And if an emotion comes up or a trigger, we want to step back and be able to look at that and say, oh, I got angry. Now, why did I get angry? And it was a trigger from things that happened before, but it's not relevant to right now. And so, okay, well, I don't want to be angry. I don't want to bring up toxic stuff in my body. That's going to make me sicker. And so I'm going to put my hand on my heart and I'm going to feel compassion for that person, or I'm going to feel love. And when I do this, then I know it dissipates that anger, because that compassion and that anger can't exist in your body at the same time. So you pick what you want to be, how you want to be. That's very important. So my PowerPoint is about Indigenous traditions lead the pathway to resilience and healing. And basically that's the whole presentation today. So what I'd like to, I'm going to present, on historical trauma, and I know that many of us can relate to this. And so right now, I would just like everybody to put your hands on your heart and take 4 deep breaths and think about gratitude, because that's your antidote to being triggered by anything. 4 deep breaths, and you can do this on your own. And just let all that negative energy flow down back to Ojimaka. And so that's one of the things that we can do anytime that we're triggered or we fall into depression and we don't feel like doing anything else. Just put your hand on your heart, because when you put your hand on your heart, you don't know it, but you're sharing this healing with somebody else that's in the same house, in the same building, in the same room, on the same Zoom. So I'd like to start out with babies are sacred. And if you notice in this picture, the baby, you could see the baby's belly cord. And that belly cord in the Lakota way is a cord that stretches out into the Nahiata and the sacred spirit world, our sacred spirit world. And we never lose that connection, even though we probably, it seems like we have lost that. We haven't lost that. We just regain it, we reconnect. What's broken can be reconnected. What's broken can be healed. And so that cord stretches out into the universe. It stretches out into where our family that left us are at, waiting for us. It stretches out to the Creator. When He sees our cord, He is happy. And when we pray, then He sends the message back that He has heard our prayers. And when you're able to start creating coherence in your heart and mind, you'll hear those messages and you'll see them, just not in the way that you'll expect, but you'll know, it's guaranteed that you will get those messages. So that part of the cord that is saved is put into a pouch, a leather pouch, and it's kept for the baby, that connection. And we always say in the Lakota way that it's kept for the baby so that they're not looking for something that they lost or feel like they lost something. And it has many other teachings along with it also. So in the Lakota way of life, when a woman becomes pregnant, the Lakota word is iglush'aka. Iglush'aka is a spiritual empowerment and strengthening of her mind, body, and spirit. The baby is a sacred gift and a messenger of healing. And with this last, the baby is a sacred gift and a messenger of healing. Sometimes the babies, don't make it. And sometimes the baby, it was a decision that the baby was no longer going to be here anymore by the mother because of the trauma that she's experiencing. And still, the baby is a sacred gift and a messenger of healing. And this is very important because when the baby is in utero, the baby, everything that the baby shares with the mother comes from the baby's body. And the placenta was used to, for a while there, some years back. Hospitals say the placenta for the stem cells, because the stem cells created recovery and healing from cancers and all kinds of different things. But now they don't do that anymore because it's not ethical. The baby shares those stem cells with us, and we share whatever it is that we're doing for the baby with our healing ways and taking care of ourselves in our pregnancy. But I just want to say that sometimes the baby doesn't make it. Sometimes the baby isn't here for those reasons. But the baby did. The baby was on a sacred mission. And the mother was blessed with those stem cells. The mother was blessed with that sacred child in her womb. And that for that reason, this baby came, for, that reason to give her a message, because they're the messenger. And that if the mother understands that this is all a part of life, there's things we don't know in this life. There's things that we're not aware of in our historical trauma. But when we learn about them and we know that the babies went back to Nagiyata, the spirit world, then they're okay and they're still growing, and that they're there to be ready for you when you're ready to reunite with them, when your journey's over on this earth. So I just wanted to talk about that piece there, and it's a very important piece because there's no end to this life. It's a continued journey. And because it's a continued journey, we have that relationship with, the spirit world, and are able to, make that connection, even though we're not aware of it, or even though we can't believe it. I mean, we can't see it. But when we start practicing our ways, we start to believe, and we start to know all these things that are possible. So today, as we're recovering, from historical trauma, intergenerational trauma, and current traumas today, there's an importance of children to Indigenous peoples and nations. And that importance is something that we often, talk about today. We say children are our future. Children are the wellspring of the future. Children are the recipients of tribal language, songs, history, religion, customs, beliefs, and practices, as imparted by parents and elders and people who are all extended family that are part of that child's life. Children are the repositories of tribal wisdom and heritage accrued over thousands of years. So we bring that to life for our children. We bring that to life because they carry it in their body memory and in their DNA. Children ensure the survival of tribal custom through oral traditions by carrying on to the sacred jingle dress dance, the different types of powwow dances that we do. That when people are out there during a powwow dancing, there's a feeling of well-being, because what they're doing out there when they're singing and they're dancing is they're changing that body memory from trauma to healing. They're changing their genetic expression, creating an environment for healing. And that when they do that, then they turn off that healing gene, because both genes can't be on at the same time. And they turn on and they turn off the trauma gene and then turn on the healing gene when that dancing is happening. And they feel it in their heart. And at a powwow, when they feel that in their heart, all these people out there, every one of those people sitting out there watching under the bari are participating, and they're getting that healing too. So those are, our healing ways, and our children, we teach them to carry on these ways. So intergenerational trauma, boarding schools and the impact of boarding schools. And these are just some of them. And I personally have experienced boarding school in my life. I have been impacted by boarding school. I know people I'm very, very close to who have been impacted by boarding schools, who have been impacted by rape in boarding schools, who have been impacted by abuse. And this abuse isn't just, a pushing of head or slapping. It's the kicking of a child, kicking them all over their body, kicking them in the head and in the face. It's of cutting their hair bald or cutting one side of their hair bald because they felt they had to punish this child. The history of boarding school is such a history that everything about boarding school is punitive. So all acts, according to people that worked in the boarding schools, all acts was to address the bad behaviors of Indigenous children. And so, they had punishment that that just didn't fit, the behaviors of the children. Because back then, nobody knew about trauma. Nobody knew that isolation and neglect, physical, mental, emotional, and verbal abuse, rape, and unidentified intergenerational trauma, the merging of trauma, boarding school to home life, unidentified intergenerational trauma. I've already said that, and the current traumas. I think this is really important to think about, because I've seen a boarding school interview, and somebody said, I don't think I experienced anything really like physical abuse in boarding school. But I just want to say, if you have been to boarding school, that experience in itself created these things here that are on this list, and especially the isolation and neglect. I grew up in a country, and back in the 60s, they did not have buses. They had no roads from where we lived onto the main roads. And so I was put in a boarding school from the time I started school. And that in itself was the most, I guess, horrifying experience for me, because I was put in a boarding school, and when my mother left, and I remember looking in the place where I was supposed to sleep, and there was rows and rows and rows of beds. And I had to go to bed, and I didn't want to go to bed because I was afraid that something felt really bad there, and it didn't feel right. And it was not so much about the people, but about the building itself and about the school. And when they put me to bed, all the lights went off and it was dark in there. And we didn't have the lights like we have today. And I remember crying and crying. And the next morning I woke up and my eyes were stuck together and nobody would help me. And I remember one of the older girls coming and helping me, and she had a washcloth and she wiped my eyes off. And she helped me to get ready for the day. And so the next night, then it was the same thing. And one of the older girls came and she took me and she took me to her bed, and I slept with her, and she rubbed my back until I fell asleep. And that was a big sister that was caring of that, you know, the girls taking care of each other in boarding school. And then there was a cutting of my hair right up to below my ears and wearing the same type of clothing that everybody else had. And so years later, I took a look at the picture of all the kids that were on one huge, it was like a 4 feet by 4 feet picture frame, really huge, and all the kids in there, and there I was. And we had that same look that those old boarding school pictures have. And what was bad about boarding school was the isolation, that nobody talked to you as a little child. Nobody sat down and gave you any attention, or nobody ever hugged you or anything. And the only thing that happened was getting spankings with a wooden paddle. If somebody came walking down a hallway and you were trying to make it to the bathroom and you got caught, then you got spanked. And you could see the older girls kneeling in a hallway with their knees on brushes. And there was neglect. There was times when girls peed their bed and nobody would come and help them. And next day that they would get up. And then when it was found out that they had wet their bed, then they got in trouble. And so there was no system of help for the children according to the developmental stages back then. And that isolation was the worst thing. And I remember my mom, and the reason why I was in boarding school and my grandparents had me was because my mom drank all the time. And I didn't understand this, why she did. I didn't understand why she didn't come and see me. But she always sent a huge, to me, it was maybe like a paper bag, a smaller paper bag, but it was always filled to the top with candy. And she would send that back with me, back with some of the older girls that went into town. And I remember always looking forward to that and really eating the candy year after year. And that was total, you know, for me, it was like something that became a pattern in my life. That's why I have the disease that I have today. Because it's like a programming. Whatever happens to you as a child and in boarding school, then you're programmed until you realize that these are all learned behaviors. And that isolation was a thing that hurt me the most. And I could not stand being alone. And I had no way of communicating. I didn't know how to communicate, to talk, to get my needs met. Because when I tried to communicate, nobody listened, or I was told to be quiet because they were talking. And so all of these things that happened were total neglect. And if you look at, you know, things that are, you know, state law for Indian child welfare, all of these things happened back then. And if you were sick, you didn't really receive the medical attention that you needed. You had to suffer. And so you would see children walking by each other with their noses running day after day after day, or having earaches, different things like that. And so that was a lot of, you know, emotional, verbal, mental, and physical abuse that I have seen happen And I seen, you know, my relatives and my friends recovering from, you know, all of the physical abuse that happened with them, all the emotional abuse that happened with them, and all the fighting that we were forced to do by the matrons, even the girls. The boys were made to fight. They had towels put on their hands. And even when they were like, you know, young, like junior high or, you know, 6th grade, they were out there fighting and blooding each other up, and they were hitting each other really hard. And I remember, like, you know, with the girls, they made us get into a circle and they put 2 of us girls in there and we had to fight. And so we grew up that way. It was like, no wonder we grew up fighting. No wonder we grew up the way that we did. We grew up tough. And that now I know that, you know, that was all part of the trauma. And so, you know, I had to learn how to find, you know, that peace in my life, and to be able to look more at being able to express myself, being able to learn how to speak without, you know, turning red because I was so embarrassed to even say one word in front of anybody. And when I went home from the boarding schools, one of the things that I seen all the time was in our community, people were drinking all the time, and children were constantly being neglected. And I knew because I've seen this happen, and seen and knew things that happened of, you know, like a little 11-year-old girl getting pregnant by you know, one of the extended family members. And then it happened again and nobody was doing anything about it. Those crimes were happening, you know, in our communities, and nobody did anything about it. And so going back now, when I take a look at, you know, all of this stuff, I came to an understanding that there was something bigger, really bigger than what was happening in these communities that happened, that allowed these types of things to happen. So when I start working in this community, I start to explore and I start to look for information about, you know, why we were the way we were, why were women coming in and presenting almost the same thing, like even from different tribes. And then one day I found a paper on Maria Yellow Horse Braveheart on historical trauma, and I read it and I reread it. And I was working with women at that time. I was advocating, I was case managing, and then I moved on to working with domestic violence and sexual assault. And thought every one of these women, their parents, their mother was abused. There was violence in the home, and about 95% of these women that came in for domestic violence also reported that they were victims of sexual assault and rape throughout their lifetime. That's a huge number. That was an eye-opener for me when I worked in domestic violence here in the Twin Cities. And so I start looking more into trauma and how, you know, trauma affects us today. And then all of a sudden, lo and behold, you know, what we know, you know, in our history as Indigenous people is we always talk about it's in the DNA, it's in the blood, you know. And so they were saying this for a reason, that, you know, we're Indigenous, we have healing, you know, we're a proud people. And so it's in the DNA and it's in the blood. And little, you know, did I realize, you know, at that time, it's in the DNA, it's in the blood, it's in the body memory, was also the trauma that was passed down because of our historical trauma. And when I learned that, then my next thought was, how is that passed down? You can tell this to somebody, but it's not going to hold up in court. This was like in the early 2000s. It's not going to hold up anywhere. They're saying, and the greater society is saying, get over it. Historical trauma happened a long time ago. little did they know they were carrying their own traumas in their body from their own, you know, intergenerational traumas also. Now it's science that, you know, our everything that, you know, our ancestors and grandparents and parents, you know, experienced, you know, in our lineage, you know, it's passed down, you know, through gene expression, through body memory. It's passed down through biomolecular memory. It actually became solid with each generation, and it manifested into something more caused by that. So with all of this stuff passing down, then I learned that it was epigenetic. There's a word for it. They call it epigenetics, and that's their science. But we know that's what's been passed down for generations. However, we have 2 tracks that have been passed down, and I talked about those earlier. That the children, you know, are the repositories, you know, of our traditional knowledge and culture, and that today, you know, in our work, then we need to really take a look at babies that are being born, because I just want to take a look at something here and show you something here. And this is that slide that I covered, but today Indigenous women are addressing intergenerational trauma through traditional birthing and creating programs that provide advocacy and empowerment to create health and well-being and healing for pregnant women to give a healthy birth. This is in recognition that the baby has a personhood from the time of conception. And so that because that baby has a personhood from the time of conception, then we know that, you know, we have to take it upon ourselves more than 100%, 200%, to have, you know, to work in our communities with women who are given birth, to help them to heal from the traumas that they've had and any current traumas and triggers that they're having while they're carrying their babies. And so it has to be healing, you know, for the pregnant women. We have to teach them healing things, and there's, you know, practices and stuff. So that's what's happening with some of the programs. And I'm working with what they call a doula program. And actually, it's about traditional birthing and doing traditional things here out of the Division of Indian Works in Minneapolis. So I am a traditional birthing guide. And this isn't and it's because of the recognition that the baby has a personhood from the time of conception, that we have to take a look at the mother and realize the rights of the baby. That, you know, in order for, you know, that baby to be born and to carry on our generations and to preserve, you know, our families and our tribes, and we have to take it upon ourselves to do something more. And that's where it began. So where does it begin? Where does healing begin? It can begin with the adults, yes, but it's the generations that are going to continue. So there are so many different, you know, it's kind of like a multi-perspective, multi-dimensional areas that we have to work in for healing. And I talked about one of them earlier, which was, you know, about teaching the history, the chronological history to Indigenous people, so that we know what we're dealing with. It's about learning how addictions affect us, so that, you know, we can work with our addictions, and that we can heal our addictions, to know that we don't have to depend on mental health to go and get healed, that we have, you know, our own healing ways. And that there are many, many Indigenous people who have healed from their own culture. So that's really, you know, important. Something to keep in mind is, you know, their organizations and researchers are starting to look at doing research on healing from addictions, you know, and so that's a really important piece to take a look at and see who's working in that area. So that's another area that, you know, we need to look at. And so when I talk about babies and getting them prepared, I have a granddaughter. My daughter got pregnant with for the first time, first and only time, and during her presence, I started to help her and teach her during her pregnancy about her emotions and how to work with her emotions so that she wasn't passing, high stress and all of this stuff on to her baby. And so she did. She was good about it, and she did practice those ways during the time that she was carrying Kimimila, my granddaughter. And so mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually, she started to take a look at that and my daughter started to practice those. And so even before Kimimila was born, we started going home for ceremony, really happy to have, her pregnant and know that we were expecting a granddaughter. And so I made a song for my granddaughter before she was born. And I visioned for her as her grandmother, because that's what we do in the Lakota way. It's one of the first stages of life. We have 4 stages, and that's one of the first stages. And I use the Lakota Star Knowledge book and the stories, and also the lived experiences of how a woman must take care of her unborn child while she carries her baby to term. And that was my own experiences with having Tiana's brothers, her older brothers, and I could see how completely changing my life as a mother back then, 30 years ago, brought out some beautiful, healthy baby boys, and how they grew up was like, I thought I was their healer, but they were my healer. These boys, they came prepackaged with everything that they have, and now they have their own drum and they sing. They're at their age, they're far beyond where I was when I was at their age. And I just want to say that that's what, healing ourselves when we're pregnant does for our children. And so, before she was born, she had her naming. I did a visioning for her and made her a song. Took her mom and I went to ceremonies at home for a healthy, safe birth, and ceremony for healing mother, ceremony for healing of granddaughter. And then we continue to take my granddaughter home to ceremony. We're going to do that throughout, I shouldn't say her life, but throughout my life as long as I'm here. And so this is going to be her first year of Wiwai Wachipi, her Sundance, and her mother and her grandmother, grandfather, and uncles, and I will all dance with her. So Kimimila has 3 grandmothers, and 2 of one is a maternal grandmother and one is a paternal great grandmother. And we all raised her because her mother worked, her mother and her father. And so each had her in our home through intervals and just did daycare for her and raised her that way. She's a traditional jingle dress dancer. Her maternal grandmother taught her the traditional art of the healing dance. And so the pathway that I visioned for her, we help her to walk today and for, the rest of our lives, for as long as we're here. So I just want to say that for everything that, there's a title here, babies are sacred. There's this down here and a lot more that encompasses that. I'm wondering if we should take a break.
We're scheduled to go till 8, and so we want to, leave some time for Q&A at the end. But if you need a break, we can fill in for you if you need to take a quick break.
I really need to take a break. I think I need to take some medicine. So
sure, yeah.
It'll take me 5 minutes.
Okay. All right.
So
yeah. I'm glad you said something. Yeah, just go ahead and do what you need to do.
Okay.
Yep, we got this. Sam, thanks for joining me. Going really great so far. I'm really enjoying listening to Nancy tell her stories and share her knowledge. And what are your thoughts?
I completely agree. I really am grateful for Nancy being able to share her perspective, her experiences, and this incredible knowledge that she is offering to us. I find it extremely beneficial to be able to, in some ways, Christina and I, we get to talk to a lot of people, often with, a lot of the same concepts, but Nancy comes, into this with her very specific experiences and the way in which she's, using her own words and understanding. It's very reaffirming with respect to the work that we have been blessed to do, to work with communities seeking healing. And one of the things that really struck me, and I wrote it down over here, because I think that, something that I think gets lost in the mix a little bit. A lot of folks are really focused on healing. How do we get to healing? Which of course is fundamental to our process. But, I think a lot of folks want to rush to healing before understanding the context. And Nancy said earlier, the knowledge and awareness of historical trauma is regenerating the health and well-being for Native Americans. And I can't, I don't think we can stress that enough, how that's an essential component. That Maria Bravehorse, Yellow Horse Braveheart agrees with that completely, confronting the trauma as a part of eventually being able to release the trauma. So that's been really sticking with me.
Yeah, it is. It's hearing it from Nancy. I met Nancy the year before I started working for the Boarding School Healing Coalition, and I actually went to an ICWA education day that her and Sandy Whitehawk and Sharon Day were all doing, and was just blown away, by the wisdom of these 3 Indigenous women, and definitely listening to the way she tells the same information, right? Like that, we've heard from boarding school survivors over the years, and because we're speaking to such a large audience across the nation, we tend to use certain language, and it's just really cool to hear Nancy talk about some of the same concepts and some of the same knowledge, but just in a much more down to earth way, not using so many of the Western science, not modifiers. What's that when you confirm something? I just lost the word. What would that word be? Western science trying to, validate.
Trying to commodify or verify, right?
Verifiers, yes, but also commodify. Yeah, we could totally get into another conversation and presentation here about that. But I'm seeing so far we've got a few questions. There's some that look like they will be for Nancy at the end of her talk, and several people asking about, if we're going to share these. Yes, we are recording all of our webinars, and we will be sharing those. If you missed last month's webinar, we will be sharing that very soon, probably next week. I say that and I'm like, but don't hold me to it. I reserve the right to send it the week after that. And so yes, we'll be recording tonight's presentation. We will be sharing that as well. There she is.
Okay. Well, thank you for that.
Of course, Nancy, we were just sharing our gratitude for how eloquent you have been sharing this information, especially as well as kind of contextualizing it through lived experiences. We were talking about how a lot of folks like to rush toward healing and sometimes discount the impact of understanding the context around historical trauma. But as somebody who has gone through these processes and has sought healing as a knowledge seeker, as one to heal oneself and to to seek healing for others in their community. You know, we really appreciate your perspective and the knowledge that you're sharing with us through your lens, and we're grateful to have you. So thank you again. And I want to invite more folks that are on to continue to drop some questions in the chat, and then once we get to around 7:45 Central, we can start to take some of those questions. Does that sound good to you, Nancy?
Yes. Yes.
Excellent.
So then I'll cruise right through. But you know, I just want to say that we have to take responsibility for, you know, our own healing. Western mental health is good, but they don't serve everybody, and not everybody. A whole lot of people don't go there for, you know, some reason or another. And so we have to take it upon ourselves to reignite, you know, our healing ways. And whatever healing that we do is going to work for us, because our body is recognizing that we're doing this for healing. So you're actually communicating that to your body, and you're creating, you know, new neural pathways in your mind. But it's through repetition. Do these things every day. It's a life way, and it's make good habits to do this every day. Get out and walk, or, you know, do something, and do the same thing every day that you're doing for health and well-being in your spirituality. Because if you don't, you kind of forget, then things, you know, don't go too good, you know, after a while. Then you have to get back on a path again. So always, you know, it's always strive to stay on a path. And I guess that's, you know, why we were born. We're born with a purpose. This is our school. This is our life, because we're going to another place, you know, a good place after this. And we want to be prepared for that and prepare our families for that. And we also have to teach our children and our families about death, you know, what death is. And it's okay. You know, it's not something that is ended forever, because it's not. It's just a continuation of our spirit, because one day we're going to die, and our body is interred back into the earth, into Unchimaka, and she'll take care of it. But our spirit, who we truly are, it's actually a shield, or this invisible energy around us, you know, the shape of our body. And so that's what is informing, you know, we are informed by the spiritual world, and that in turn informs our heart and who we truly are. So everything starts right here. It's a seed of motivation. So we make it a positive motivation. And a lot of times people say, I'm a spirit. I can't, where's my spirit at? I can't feel it. I can't see it. And so I would just say, you know, we can't see it, or we can't feel it, but we know it's there, and we definitely know when it's not there. So we want to make sure that, you know, we become self-aware, we become alert, and that, you know, we always, you know, take a look at, you know, our own thought processes and stuff, because that's where, you know, thoughts and feelings began, that we make sure that we're in control of those, that we think what we want to think, that we create, you know, healthy thoughts. But in order to feel our own spirit, I always say, just go like this, you know, rub your hands. And then there's a whole exercise thing I do, and it's just like, you know, it's just like outlining your body, and that's just going, I don't know if you can see me, I can't see myself, but it's just like outlining, and then coming back up the same way and doing that, and you could feel your hands start to tingle. And so when your hands start to tingle, you bring it together, and you can feel the energy ball. You can feel that energy ball. And then you take it, and I don't know if you can see my head, but you put it right here, especially where all that spirituality is. Your energy is pushing back. You can actually feel that. And then when you bring it up here, you can actually feel that. And then you take your finger, close your eyes, and go close. You don't even have to use your finger, just use your hand. You could feel that on your forehead so strong. That's your energy. That's who you truly are. And that energy, you're capable of doing and living the kind of life that you want. If you just use your physical body and your thoughts and try to make things happen, it doesn't happen that way. You want to use your energy, and you want to use all the positive emotions, the values, so that you don't have to be pushing through mud every day and being so tired. Use your energy field to make things happen. It's important. So intergenerational trauma, I've covered that. Intergenerational trauma, women pass on their lived experiences to their unborn child. For example, if she has been traumatized during or at some point in her life, she will pass on that trauma, pass on the trauma genes to her child. How men treat women is passed down to her child and contributes epigenetically to the comorbidity, morbidity, and mortality of that child. Our bodies tell her or his story through the biomolecular body memories. So that's really important to remember. Always make good memories. The impact of intergenerational trauma is that the comorbidity, morbidity, and mortality rates are really high for Indigenous people. And the comorbidity rates are those things that I read off of the impacts of boarding school. Impacts of boarding school on, Indigenous children. And those impacts are, not impacts, but those things are like isolation, neglect, all the abuses, all the things that happen. Those are the comorbidity that, when they start to get depressed and become highly stressed and stuff, then it's turns into a morbidity. It turns into a disease. Indigenous people have the highest mortality rates in the United States. Two highest comorbidities are anxiety and depression, along with the isolation and trauma associated with physical, emotional, and mental pain. Most often, the root cause is unresolved trauma. The typical treatment for the pain is a narcotic subscription by a doctor. Self-medication is drugs, alcohol, food, and other addictions. And so I just wanted to point out that what's happening in our communities is that people are being treated with narcotics, opioids, and thus starts the addiction to drugs. We don't need that anymore because we do have our own healing ways for that. We just need to know what they are. We need to share that knowledge. Historical trauma, dysfunction, and healing. We flee from all the self-knowledge because there is pain there and we don't understand our own pain. Our coping skills and survivals are self-medicating and drug addictions. We split off our personality and take on our mothers and ancestors. We don't know what's below to us and what belongs to us and what does not belong to us. We experience pathologies and can't sustain school, a job, relationships, and a family life. We fall deeper into a way of life that is not conducive for health, well-being, and spirituality until we wake up and become self-aware of our traumas and release these traumas through healing. Through our traditions, our DNA guides us back to the past of healing through knowledge, practices, and traditions. We learn a whole new life filled with guiding values. Our true North Star are our guiding values. So in order to create healing in our life, synchronization of heart and mind is vital. It's for stress management and for healing, overall healing. We synchronize our hearts and minds when we use the positive language of values and value-driven activities. This in turn creates heart and brain coherence, resilience, and overall health and well-being for the body. So these are the values. We have to learn what values are. Sometimes we do a circle and some people say are embarrassed because they don't know what a value is, and so you have to start with really the basics. The best, I mean, the value that I like best is gratitude. Just to, if I don't know how I'm feeling, just get up and give gratitude. Because one time my grandmother, she wrote a little booklet. She was my grandma was a healer, and her name was Vicky Chips, and they traveled all around the world. And one time, and she, before she passed, she wrote a little booklet and said, "I'm old now, and I was walking in the rain between my two houses, and I fell down. I slipped and fell, and I laid there and thought, I can't get up. And then I realized I'm alive. I can holler. Somebody can help me. They can help me get up and walk." She said, "I am thankful for that. I am so thankful for life." And that was what she wrote in her book. And I never forgot that. So I always think gratitude. And she said, never have love or never have anger and hate. Don't wake up with those. If you have anger and hate, make 4 ties and put those prayers of love, of happiness, and something else in your ties, she said. And so I always thought about that. And this was even before I knew about values and that they truly did generate healing when you said them, you expressed them, you practiced them. This tree, tree of values, life and values, the roots are healing roots. And they're healing roots because these values that are written in these hearts up here, they're all down here in the healing roots. This is who you are. This heart here, that's who you are. So you incorporate all these values. This tree here, in our bodies, there's something that everything in our body looks like out here in this physical world on this land. So this tree within our own brains, this tree looks like a dendrite in our brain. So it's got the roots and it's got those things and it does the same thing. And so up here, when we practice our values, then everything we do every day, then those values, are what drives our movement and our activities, physical activities for the day. So you could be cooking a healing meal, you could be making a ribbon dress, you could be doing your work, but you're writing things to help people and to save a life. You could be walking, you could be running, and as you're doing those, and a lot of times that's when people, pay attention to their spirituality. So it's always good to get out there and do that. So everything you put up here are all your own activities, and because you're unique and no one else is. And what drives us, what sustains us, what heals us, and what gives us life are those values. And we place those in our heart every day. So these are traditional practices that I put in there, and I mean, they're not traditional practices, but they're things that people can relate to, like gathering medicines, daily purification. Like I said, use your sage, pray with water, drink the water. You just changed the water and made it healing. Pray when you pray, or make a meal and you're making a really good meal. Pray with it and put some food out there. Prayers and ties and flags. Keeping your hands busy, use your creativity. It's beautiful when women and men use their creativity. They come with really indigenous people come up with beautiful things because they have that art in their heart and they have that creativity in their mind. Always, maintain your positive energy. Make relatives, ceremonies, heart activation through positive values. Positive intention, healthy emotions, visiting. Always learn how to visit if you don't know how to visit, or keep up the visiting if you're a good visitor. Positive thinking, energy awareness, and I did a little bit of that energy awareness for you. There's other ways to do it. Learning traditional life ways, dreams, visions, knowledge, empowering values. So do your daily spiritual practices, let your heart guide, prayer, meditation, one thought, one prayer, spiritual energy, intuition, and knowing when we practice all these ways. So this is the brain in Lakota, Nasula. It means seed. That's how you say brain in Lakota, Nasula. So we plant seeds of healing knowledge and daily repetition of hands-on practice to create new permanent neural healing pathways in both the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. Then you're creating a balance between your brain. And when you're traumatized, then there is no balance because there's, you know, a cortical piece of tissue of fiber that connects the brain, and that shrinks. But when you start your healing and start practicing, then it grows again. The brain is amazing. And so those neural healing pathways become deep through practice, repetition, and habit. These are our ways where we chose on health and well-being, and I talked about dancing, singing at the powwow, even singing our own songs as women. Women, we have beautiful songs. Use your voice, sing. It's healing for yourself and for your family. So we have the sweetgrass, cedar, sage, and Pajuta medicines, all the root medicines, plant medicines, indigenous, active, healing the whole person, mind, body, and spirit. The body's natural healing pharmacy is, we have all of these that are put into pharmaceutical drugs like antidepressants and stuff. So dopamine, it plays a key role in movement and affects motivation, perception of reality, and the ability to experience pleasure. Oxytocin, hug or shake someone's hand to get oxytocin. Share positive energy, helps moms be moms. Healing, relief of physical pain and emotional pain. Antidepressant and stress relief. So oxytocin, that's in the bare root medicine. So you can make root tea out of that. You can make tea out of that and then drink it, or you can use it as incense, burn it, and just kind of whiff it a couple times. Don't do it more times than a couple times, because it helps you to sleep too. So use it only a couple times, and if you want to sleep, do it more times. Serotonin helps regulate mood. It's a natural feel-good chemical. And endorphins release pain and can produce feelings of euphoria. It works similar to a class drug called opioids or morphine. Thus, runner's high, exercise, dark chocolate, spicy food, laughter, and humor. Doctors recommend exercise to help depression. So humor, you know, activates your endorphins, and all of these things are activated, you know, more than one at a time. So it's just not one thing at a time. It's important to know that, you know, we have this huge pharmacy of healing within our bodies. So indigenous movement and activities create healing: walking, running, dancing, singing, traditional healing plants, sage, cedar, sweetgrass, prayer, ceremonies, meditation, creativity, beading, sewing, making a hand drum, and many other things, writing, cleaning, gardening, visiting, laughter, and humor. And I know that as Indigenous people, we really like to laugh. So, you know, I just want to say that this is the end of my PowerPoint, and I think I have finished in a really timely manner. I'm happy to say. So on this, on the opening here, I have things. These are just really practical, hands-on things that we use, you know, for, I know as Indigenous people, you know, all across the nations, we have, you know, our different medicines and stuff, but these are things that we can use that are just so practical. And this is an eagle fan or an eagle feather. You know, you can sit there and pray with it, or use it to sage off your whole house. This is a sage bowl, and this is sage. And on this little thing here, you can't see it too good, but this is a bare root medicine. And so that's a really good medicine to know and to use, along with the bitter root. Bitter root is for colds and flus and stuff, and so I know that we're familiar with that. And I talked about bare root, and the reason why this is really significant for me is because I was using bare root medicine, and I thought, every time I use something, I have to look it up and down and look on the web and look in all kinds of sites and stuff and whatnot. But anyway, bear root, I found a video on this on the web, and there was some bears sitting on a hillside, and below them was a bunch of bushes. They were all sitting there quietly onto themselves, and pretty soon one of them went up and got down there and started digging into the roots and start eating, and others followed suit. Pretty soon they were all down there digging up and eating the bear root, and where they were down there, they start hanging on to each other and putting each other's head on, you know, cheek to cheek or just face to face, and then they'd sit down beside each other and look at each other and grab each other. Pretty soon they were rolling around down the hill and stuff, and I thought, what is causing them to do this? And then I knew what it was, because I found that site by looking up Oceti. And so that was really something really awesome to see. But no wonder our people use these medicines, because they know what they do. We have, you know, a whole, you know, I would say we have our medicines, you know, within our respective tribes that we use, and we need to start learning about our own medicines, and other tribes shared with me their medicines. And so it's like, you know, our knowledge is really growing, you know, in this area. Just a really beautiful way of life. And I just want to say that this bear root is really love medicine. So I'll leave you at that. And, you know, thank you for asking me to be on this. And I am done here. Thank you.
Oh, Pilamia, Chimigwich, thank you so much, Nancy. That was a wonderful presentation. I appreciated all of your stories and all the knowledge that you shared with us. And before I turn it over to Sam to do the Q&A, I texted Sam and I said, I got to say something before you jump into Q&A, because I just, you know, when we had to come on and do the you know, the little banter on the impromptu break there, I wasn't quite sure how to say it, but what I was trying to say, and I didn't quite say very eloquently, was, you know, what you're sharing is from an Indigenous perspective. It is from our perspective. And a lot of times we are discovering now that science, you know, Western science is saying, oh, we discovered this, and then Indigenous peoples are going, no, we knew that all along. And so there's part of that that's really beautiful, and the way you shared, and you know, our cultures are beautiful, and the way we related to each other and the earth, that is healing and restoring to return to that. But it's also sometimes a little maddening, because it's like, okay, so we had all this really great knowledge and knew how to exist as a society and human beings in harmony with nature and the planet, and then we got colonized, and they thought we were, you know, savages, and they thought our knowledge was inferior. And you know, that's kind of the definition, I think, of white supremacy, was they just thought their ways were better, and forcibly assimilated us. And so your talk really put it into perspective that no, we have beautiful cultures and beautiful ways and amazing knowledge that, you know, Western science is just going to take a couple thousand more years to catch up with.
Yes. And you know, the final kind of like note on that is that whatever it is that we do, whatever our intentions are, you know, to heal from historical trauma and current traumas and high stress today, whatever it is that we do is going to work for us, because now we know. And having that knowing is going to create, you know, a whole different way of life, of healing for us as people. Nobody can take that from us. Nobody can say that it doesn't work, because it has worked since time immemorial. Whatever it is, even current day, even if you do yoga, it's going to work.
Again, Glaso Kamati, Nancy and Christine, thank you for sharing those words of gratitude for Nancy. This has been incredible, a wonderful day and moment together for learning. and for just being together. Another aspect of our fellowship today that Nancy, you brought up, that I think a lot of people can resonate with, especially in these times dealing with this pandemic and these types of moments where we are in virtual spaces together. Of course, ideally, we would love to be able to, in a safe way, of course, be in the same room, in the same space, being able to share that energy in that way. It's been difficult for all of us, I'm sure, not having these opportunities to be able to be together in community. And it was like a breath of fresh air when you shared to me. You might not know it, but you're sharing the healing with others right now. And I felt that. I felt grounded because of that, with my feet on the floor and taking those deep breaths together, knowing that there were, dozens of people also doing that exact same exercise and sharing that intentional, deliberate moment is really very grounding, to say the least, and a great reminder that we are still connected, even if we're separated by a screen. Our feet are still firmly planted on our Mother Earth. So I really appreciated that guidance there, and I'm sure others have as well. So Laskamati Welmiak for that. And with that, we'll start looking at some of these questions. We have a couple. And I put something in the chat in response to somebody sharing. I don't know a lot about boarding schools. So I'm embarrassed to say I don't know a lot about boarding schools, and we urge you not to be embarrassed about this. We also want to remind folks that it is systemic. That the reason why we are in community together right now is because of the lack of awareness and the misinterpretation of these histories, and part of the role of NABS is to restore the integrity, to restore the dignity of these important histories and the stories that are being shared, and of course that goes without saying, the incredible knowledge that Nancy has offered us today. So for those seeking to learn more, I put a link in the chat that goes back to our first episode of our Truth in History webinar series from last year. Christine, myself, and our Director of Digital Archives, Stephen Curley, conducted what you might consider an Indian boarding schools primer, or Indian boarding schools 101, about a general scope. And we talk a lot about the historical context, the role of NABS as a the effort to increase that awareness and advocacy, but also to invite community to be able to center that healing process. So please check that out, and visit our YouTube site for more videos, of course. So again, don't be embarrassed by it. The reality is that our society has suppressed a lot of this information and has tried to push this stuff under the rug. So the fact that we don't know as much as we should about it collectively as a society is as a result of the colonialism, the ongoing legacy of those decisions and that political power.
Sam, I'd like to just share a quick story, and if you bother to watch our YouTube videos, you'll probably hear me say the same thing again in another video. But in Canada, when they had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the boarding schools that they had in Canada, they called them residential schools, they did a poll, and before the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, about 30% of Canadians knew that this was part of their country's history. And after the 5-year commission from 2010 to 2015, 70% of Canadians knew that this was a part of their history. I've been doing this work for about 6 years, and I would say that the number of people in this country who know that this was part of our history, that we had this genocidal policy to remove Indian children and assimilate them and convert them, is in the single digits. It's less than 10%. So absolutely our mission here is is about raising that awareness for non-Native people, and then within our communities, you know, talking about how it has impacted us and how we heal. So let's move on to questions, because looking at the time, and I don't want us to, I want to respect everyone's time, especially Nancy, who's given us so much this evening.
Good. Here's a question, Nancy, that that you might be able to, well, that I hope you have some perspective on. It says, I'm curious to know about your experiences or the traditional knowledges of implementing plant medicines and healing, perhaps even psychedelic plant medicines.
I'm not familiar with psychedelic plant medicines, but I think, you know, just for the plant medicines in themselves, you know, that is actually a whole education piece too, for what each plant does. And not only does each plant, you know, have some type of healing, you know, property to it, but each plant has a spirit with it. And so that plant has to be activated by that knowledge. So it's a whole series of, you know, education on, you know, these plants and where the plants come from and how they were used.
Thank you for that. And another comment similarly, I agree that Western science has a lot to learn from Indigenous wisdom and medicine and values. Thank you so much for this presentation. A lot of gratitude right here. I'm reading. Thank you for thank you for this beautiful healing time. I'm grateful to be in this loving space with you. Do you believe that this should be in our school textbooks?
Definitely. In on our reservations, when they had like homeschooling, I mean, like had their own charter school, then they teach all these things. They teach different. They take them out onto the land, out of the schoolroom.
We also believe that as well, and one of the reasons that we need to be here in community and fellowship is that this history tends not to be in textbooks, and some of the research that we have identified as recently as 2014 in a study that identified that only 4 states in the United States have even a single mention of Indian boarding schools in their curricular content standards, K through 12. And when you think of those missed opportunities for collective learning and being able to implement collective change, if there are only 4 states that even mention it, this isn't even to say that there are robust lessons or you know that there are robust examinations of this period of time. It's just mentioned in content standards. Certainly we need to be seeing more of that, and that's what we're calling for too, as a coalition, for a greater awareness and to be able to see that change. And we want to see more states be able to address that in that way. Here's another question, and I think this is contextualized by a lot of the information that you offered us. Highlights the central notion that traditional knowledge, that ceremony, is so central to healing historical trauma and intergenerational trauma. This question asks, what are the implications for those that are not connected to their traditional communities?
A lot of times in my work, I've worked with so many families here in the city, so many women, and one thought always comes to my mind, that they're lost, you know, and they always have like a feeling of, it's like a feeling of depression and sadness. And so with that, then they would say, I don't know my traditions, I don't know my language. And I would say, well, that's okay, because there's a place to start. Right now, here's what we can learn. We can learn about the plant medicines. This is what you need to do in your home with these medicines. Well, is it okay to have sage in my living room when somebody's drunk or using drugs and they come? You know, things like that. And so basically it's just learning. That's why I said there's a lot of learning around the plant medicines, because it's actually learning about spirituality, their own, and what they can do with that.
Thank you for that. I think this is a good question, contextualizing, offering context for how we can bring this into our own communities. But this question asks, how can I create an Alaskan boarding school healing teaching? I'm Inupiaq, and at age 58, I would like to bring this to Alaska. How can individuals wanting to bring healing to their community work toward that goal?
That's my job. That's my life. You know, my passion is to go out and teach everything. So it's everything about who we are as Indigenous people. You know, from the historical trauma, the intervention, the recovery pieces, and the healing pieces. And that, you know, because each tribe is different, they can take that, and it's just a framework, take that and use that framework to set up their own healing things and learn more at the same time about other healing modalities.
Is there a way people can contact you?
Yes, you can put my email up.
Okay. We will we'll share that with those who registered. Also, to that question, you know, we have at the Boarding School Healing Coalition, because we're national and we work with so many different tribal communities, we have partners up in Alaska, and we've, you know, often been very informed by them about how the situation is different, not only their you know, their trust land and their situation around being, you know, considered a tribe versus a corporation, simply because, you know, the way the government administration handled dealing with these sovereign nations. And of course, boarding schools were carried out differently for Alaskan Natives as well. So feel free to email us. We'll also give you Nancy's information so that you can contact her. But we have a couple partners up in Alaska that we could also put you in contact with.
I went up to the Haida Tlingit, Juneau, the Haida Tlingit Corporation, and did a training, historical trauma training for them. I was really impressed, and I can't remember this lady's name, but I think she worked with the state, and she was, I forgot whether she was Eskimo or what she was, but she talked about historical trauma, and she told a story of historical trauma for generations back from her family, everything that aligned with, you know, the Indian policies and everything like that up their way. So I know that they have a lot to offer, you know, in their own historical trauma. That, you know, we come from the lower 48, but, you know, we still, you know, share, and we have, you know, we have a process, you know, we can create, you know, a system of network of healing of all tribes.
Well, thank you again, Nancy Tlasokamati, and to everybody that joined us today. It is now 1 minute after 8 p.m. We are sure that it's been a full day for you all, as it has been for us. So we want to respect your time, Nancy. We want to respect your time as well. Truly, truly grateful for this time with you. It's very special, very. I know that when I lay my head down tonight to go to bed, that being able to ground this space and be in community with you and everyone here together is gonna help me rest peacefully. So I appreciate that. We will be in touch with all of those that registered and attended this session for our next webinar next month, and we have some really incredible programming coming up. So please stay in touch with us, and we'll be sharing those updates with you all shortly. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Chimiquich, Gigawabaman, Bamapi. Bye, everyone.
Timo Itaske.